Well, to summarize this story for the Gorge Grown area, the farmers spend $20 million a year more producing crops and livestock than they get from the economy. They buy $90 million of farm inputs in the process of losing money farming. And their neighbors buy $200 million worth of food from far away. As you can tell, this amounts to a fairly steady flow of money out of the Gorge Grown region. The total loss, in fact, is $310 million from just what we've tracked in those three items, which is more than the value of all the food products currently being produced by all the farmers in this region in each year. And it really calls into question, what is agriculture doing as a way of helping people build health and build food for themselves as they want to negotiate a healthy life. Well, now let's step back away from Gorge Grown and look at some other regions very quickly, just to give a sense of how that compares with other stories that I've been able to run into. Let's look at Clark County, Washington very, very quickly to see what the story we found there was. In Clark County, we noticed that most of the farmings, it involves nursery crops and Christmas trees. In fact, as you see, the majority of sales, or I'm sorry, a large part of the sales go to ornamental and nursery crops that are really tied up in suburban sprawl, not in eating. And this puts farmers in a funny cycle, because they're actually raising the very products which will encourage people to develop housing, which will take farmland out of the market and undermine their ability to survive as farmers. Raising the price of land on them and giving a market that really depends on further suburban expansion to keep farmers alive. It's a cycle the farmers of Clark County really need to break if they're going to survive as agriculturalists. We concluded that 1/3 of all commodity sales, in fact, are nursery crops in this region. A really phenomenal flow when you think of how many people live in this region that need to eat every day, and what prime soils they have, and a historical orchard industry as well. So here's the same chart that I gave you for Gorge Grown region, but it shows that farmers have basically held their costs steady and a little bit declining since 1969. The cash return has been falling. This does show the decline of farmers. Farmers have really gotten out of agriculture because they saw the price margins being too difficult. But basically a pretty steady erosion of the fortunes of farmers over this time. All in all, in the last 11 years, $4.7 million lost by this county, this single county, farmers in this county alone, farming when they have to spend more to farm than they get back from the market. So if we look at Clark County, we have a similar set of numbers. Farmers here only lose $400,000 a year in production costs because there are many fewer farms in Clark County. They buy $30 million of inputs from far away, while their neighbors are buying $700 million of food from distant sources. And so we posed the question to the local Food Policy Council: why wouldn't you want to connect local farms with this $700 million market that's right in your neighborhood that is eating 3 times a day if they're able to? Now, I'm going to step back to the state of Oregon as a whole and look at the same chart for the state of Oregon. And you start seeing the same patterns when we look at statewide that we saw in the Gorge Grown area, and also even in Clark County. You see farmers basically holding their costs pretty steady as much as they can. They've declined some in the recent years and then started shooting back up. The cash return is not very good. Overall, the slide downward looks the same. We have the same peak years. In 1974, agriculture brought in $1.4 billion surplus to the Oregon economy. What would that look like to the budget deficit we have at the legislature today? And overall, since 1982, farmers have spent $2.6 billion more producing crops and livestock than they got from the market. So you start to get a sense that this is a system at work. That's at work in Gorge Grown area. It's at work in the state of Oregon. Let's try the state of Washington as a whole and see what happens here. This is in some ways a better story because, again, farmers actually costs are increasing a little bit. The cash return has been a little bit more steady, and actually farmers have made money every year except for 3 since 1969. So $11 billion of surplus value created by Washington state farmers since 1982. Unfortunately, it's also true that they're earning $1 billion less now than they were in 1969 after massive expansion of orchards, massive expansion of production, phenomenally good new technical expertise, new equipment that's really precious, high productivity. It's not being rewarded in the marketplace. So some better news for farmers in Washington state, but also some decline. And again, the peak years, we haven't been close to that kind of peak for a long, long time. I'm not sure how to get this one. Okay. We can go to the next slide again, thanks. Well, that was too far. You saw that photograph that said U.S. data. That actually is a photograph taken pretty close to here that I took on my way to my cousin's wedding. You'll see some images you might recognize soon. But here's the same data for the United States as a whole. And between these two arrows, basically, would show the same data set for the United States as we saw for Oregon and Washington. And again, you see the very same patterns where farmers are holding the cost steady, the market's not rewarding them, and the income profile is really sliding downward. Notice in 1973, farmers in this country earned $110 billion of surplus for the national economy in 1 year. And notice that that led to a crisis, and we're now at much lower levels. I also have some other reasons for showing this long historical sweep. This goes back to 1929, because I want to make another point. In the Midwest, I heard a lot of people say that last year was the best year we've had since 1974, 2008. And that's true, it was the best year. But 1974 was a lot better, wasn't it? Even though that led to a crisis, a lot of money came into the farm economy. But the other thing I want to point out is that in 2008, the farm income in the United States nationally was less than it was for farmers in 1929 after 9 years of a rural depression. And again, this suggests that our future of agriculture could be somewhat shaky, and we better think carefully about whether we can sustain the kind of assumptions we've made about agriculture being the way it has been for a number of years to come. We had a pretty regular set of prosperity for farmers in World War II because Europe was devastated by war and couldn't produce its own food. We loaned money to Germany and France so they could buy grain from us. That provided some lasting prosperity for a while, but again, that dwindled away. It was only kind of solved by the OPEC energy days, and then we had the crisis. And now we're having a sort of steady, fairly negative return, or not just very positive return for farmers.